Stress is just one of those things that we've all experienced at one point or another. And yeah, there's an extreme range of types and intensities when it comes to different stressors. From, I hope I can pass this test that I didn't study for.
What do you have for question 1 through 100?
To, oh no, the planet's on fire, no one seems to care, and we're all gonna die. But no matter the severity, we all have, will, or are currently experiencing something that will fall somewhere on the how bad am I freaking out today spectrum.
A lot!
And some of the greatest escapes from the harsh, sad boy realities of life are video games. Terrorist murdering, bathe in the blood of my enemies, island fishing video games. So it seems almost antithetical to the purpose of video games to be sitting on your booty holder of choice, cheeks clenched, sweating through your shirt, and having a full-on midlife crisis at every nudge of the joystick or click of a mouse. But let's be honest, it do be like that sometimes. And those kinds of stressful times were some of the most frustrating and annoying moments that I've ever had. But on the other, better and more highly manicured hand, a lot of those nail-biting moments were some of the most enjoyable, memorable, and addicting times that have kept me mashing buttons all night. So yeah, I just want to talk about that. Stress can be defined in a couple of different ways. The Mental Health Foundation describes it as the degree to which you feel overwhelmed or unable to cope with unimaginable pressure, while the dictionary calls it a physical, chemical, or emotional factor that causes bodily or mental tension. So either way, it's not good. And for a lot of people, video games and other forms of media provide an escape or at the very least a distraction from those things that you're unable to cope with and that cause that mental tension. But there's a bunch of different origin points from which video games can cause stress to flow into you. Whether it's genre-based, difficulty-based, or just annoying mechanics that make things way more difficult than they really need to be. And depending on how a game applies its pressure will change whether I'm raring to go for another round or if I'm already calling to make a doctor's appointment to get my blood pressure checked. And for me, nothing says time for a physical more than when a game just randomly decides to throw a timer onto something for no real reason. It's just like, why? Like, really? What made you think, you know what would really make this pretty foundationally simple gameplay section more interesting? Just a dash of impending doom. Because most of the time, whatever the game is actually trying to get you to do isn't that hard or interesting in the first place. Or it's just really basic at its core. So it feels like the game is just trying to be harder and more engaging than it really is. When in reality, it just comes off annoying, monotonous, and at its worst, kinda stressful. Hashtag games be like, run over here and slap up on this switch, then run a half mile in 20 seconds to squeeze through this gate. Oh, you didn't make it? Well, try again, loser. Hashtag games be like, hey, can you fight and beat an entire football team with only a ham and cheese sandwich and make it back to the dance in time to be crowned prom king? No? Well, now you gotta watch your girl kiss some other dude in a cutscene and try again, only this time with tears in your eyes. And then the worst, most dastardly timer of them all. That one that says, hey, don't drown. Because anytime someone says that I only have a certain amount of time to do something, no matter how trivial, it's gonna get my heart rate up and have me worried, even if it's just a little bit. Especially if I have to watch an on-screen timer count down to a possible redo. And then if I fail once, it's like a snowball effect and each run gets worse and worse, boosting my dang stress levels, and it's just not an enjoyable experience for me. And if by some miracle the section actually is challenging or, God forbid, even fun, then the timer just feels restrictive and controlling while continuing to unnecessarily inflate the difficulty. And what was a fun gameplay section now isn't. And now I'm just feeling the pressure of the clock and it's kinda just stressful. And yeah, I know it's just another way to try and add some spice to the game.
Yeah, boy.
But it always just leaves me feeling like it would be better or no different if the timer wasn't there. Or if I fail, like it's not even due to my own abilities, more like the game just arbitrarily decided that I wasn't good enough. It's almost like having a timed math test. Like you can understand the concepts and know how to solve the problems, but just because you couldn't finish under the time limit, now you got a D. The stress and frustration just feels unfair and unjustified, and kinda just leaves me feeling cheated. And I get that exact same time's up, please hand in your test, cheated feeling from tacked on stealth sections. You know, like when a game really isn't even close to being a stealth game, but it still decides to throw in some stealth missions even though the systems can't really handle it very well. And yeah, I know games and spice and all that, but it really just never feels right when you get caught in those games because it just feels clumsy and unpredictable. Like I'm already sitting there tense, just praying to the gods that I don't get seen. Then I nudge the joystick like half a centimeter too far, and then whatever character I'm playing that has zero business trying to sneak anywhere does a triple backflip off of whatever conveniently placed box I'm trying to hide behind, and lands right in front of the guard that I'm trying to sneak past. And now, all of a sudden, I'm having heart palpitations.
Help me!
But then somehow, he doesn't even see you, so you're like, okay, that's weird, but I'll take it. Then you step on a twig and every guard in like a 5-mile radius hears you and knows where you are, like you just sounded the friggin' horn of Gondor. It's already stressful enough to have to be sneaking around in the first place, but now I don't even know what will or won't get me caught, or if my character will even control well enough to prevent it from happening. And don't even get me started on having to drag some NPC around as they do vigorous jazzercise in the middle of a gunfight. I just want to get them to whatever safe zone I need to so I can quit my job as a babysitter and get back to actually enjoying the game. The NPCs never help you help them and are always making bad decisions. So you might just hit game overs because the NPCs just stood there and let nonsense happen to themselves. And it can be frustrating because the game won't even let you make a smart decision, like leaving them somewhere else so you can do what you have to do and then coming back to get them later. And for the most part, these are kind of just issues that plague older games, as newer ones have kind of gotten better and smarter when it comes to these kind of things. But if you've ever went back to play one of your favorite games as a kid, or just tried to dip into one of the classic games that a lot of people talk about, you can end up hitting some of these stressful moments. And it can be annoying because it feels like you don't have any control over the situation. I didn't fail my math test because I didn't know what to do. I failed because you decided I did. And once I start to feel that way, immersion and engagement all but start to fall away. It feels annoying and arbitrary, and then you start to remember, oh wait, I'm supposed to be having fun. And I'm not. I'm annoyed and it's starting to stress me out. And obviously it's a problem if you're starting to feel more frustration than fun, whether it's an issue with the game or just the mechanics not being for you. The way that stress was applied ended up being more demotivating than engaging. But on the other hand, there are those games where being uncomfortable and feeling tension, being stressed, is your motivator, and is where both your immersion and fun is coming from. And that's the kind of stuff that I've been finding myself more and more attracted to in video games. Like, look at survival and resource management games. They're the perfect example of the type of games where the stress just hooks me right away. They simultaneously make me feel like the game is watching me like a disappointed parent, constantly reminding me that I need to be better at budgeting money and that I need to make sure I'm getting enough sleep and eating right. Or in the case of Frostpunk, make me feel like I'm a disgrace to life and that my best wasn't enough, so I'll do everyone a favor and go die alone in the frozen wasteland. Damn. While also feeling so much fun from knowing that the game is looking at me like that. Cause that game was just so rough in the best of ways. The very first time I pressed play on Frostpunk, I was sitting there for 9 hours straight. Every second of it, I was worrying if I was making the right choices and what would or wouldn't happen if I messed up. And just in case you're unaware of what Frostpunk is, it's just a struggle in video game form. To keep it short and sweet, you're the leader of a group tasked with building a settlement in an icy post-apocalyptic world, and it's your job to keep your citizens hopeful, content, and warm, while managing resources and various events that affect your ability to do that. A very simple concept, but one that will have you genuinely stressed and worried for you and your people, and your role in saving them. The game is constantly throwing problems at you that you need to solve without completely sending your citizens into a depression or just straight up making them hate you and want to rebel. You always have a reminder of how your people are feeling and exactly what you did to make them feel that way. It doesn't help that pretty much everything you do has an unequal and opposite reaction that only serves to screw you over in the end. Whether you're trying to make moral, logical, or emotional decisions, it's all downhill all the time. Like, here's an example. Maybe your scout team comes across a group of survivors out in the wilderness, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I know we've been running low on people who work different positions, and I really don't want to make children work because that obviously won't go over well. And these people, they have supplies with them too. Like, bringing them in could only be a benefit. But then you realize, oh, wait, I have to build them places to live, don't I? Or they'll get sick and die in the cold. And then you think, I didn't have anyone working in the sawmill because I needed more coal workers to keep the generators on. So we don't have enough wood to build houses, and they're pretty much guaranteed to get sick. And then, oh yeah, the hospitals are already full, so if any of the survivors get sick before I can make them houses, they're probably gonna die, lowering our town's morale and making everyone hate me. And it can be tough and honestly kind of sad sometimes. And obviously it's super stressful. And yeah, I know that was a very specific story. And yeah, I am still recovering from the trauma. But it was also super fun, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. The game is so good at applying pressure because it never lets you go too long without having to make some kind of choice. And every choice will have a negative effect whether it's big or small. And because it's my little town that I built from the ground up and my people that I'm taking care of, it was really easy to get me to feel super invested in every action. Short-sighted or unrealistic demands from the people, decisions on how to address constantly draining resources, and moral dilemmas that always kept me on my toes. And it was a lot. It was a lot to keep track of, and it was a lot to manage. It's stressful, but it's also addictive. And when I finally accomplish different little goals or fix a problem that puts the town back in working order, the stress is released, if but for a moment, and it feels great. That stressful feeling of having to make important choices and not really knowing how far-reaching the consequences will be carry over to interactive story-based games like From Telltale or Until Dawn. From the moment I start one of those games, I instantly begin to second-guess every decision that I make, along with who I am as a person. Whenever you accidentally get one of your characters killed in Detroit Become Human, berleezy, or in Until Dawn, it will have you wondering if you're really just garbage in the shape of a human being, because that's what it makes me feel like.
Know your fucking place, trash!
Knowing that one wrong choice can have severe consequences makes even the most menial tasks a problem. Because you never really know if taking a sip of coffee will somehow inadvertently lead to the deaths of all those that you hold dear. Because the very first time that I saw Clementine Will Remember That, I was ready to restart the whole game and I was only like 10 minutes in, and go out into a zombie apocalypse during the dead of night, which don't make no sense. And that's just how much the power of letting the player know that their actions have consequences can be. And it's wildly stressful. Like, it can have you sitting there on the pause screen for 20 minutes holding a debate club in your head or with whoever's in the room. But it's impossible to deny that even though your anxiety is going through the roof, it's a super cool feeling to know that what you're doing actually matters, and that you'll only find out the outcome of your choices when they smack you in the face.
Well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions.
Competitive games also force you to make a lot of meaningful decisions, but at an extremely fast rate. The difference here being that the outcomes of your decisions are usually far more instantaneous and complex, because there's another real-life person having to make just as many quick decisions going against you.
Bring it on, bitch.
Your shooters, fighters, MOBAs, and so on all force you into a constant state of having to observe, read, act, react, and engage with another person or persons opposite of you to see which one of you can make the best choices at the right time and come out on top. And you best believe that stuff be stressful. Like in fighting games, there's so many different factors that have to be considered while you're in a match that it's mind-boggling. Like, have you ever listened to someone try to explain one of their matches or heard a commentator during a tournament? They'll be like, okay, if I go for this move, it will cause a knockdown if it hits. which will put him in a 50-50 state. But if he guesses wrong, I'll have the option to go for a full damage combo. But if he guesses right, then I'll be at disadvantage. So I'll assume that he'd guess right in this situation and stagger my approach to bait and punish him after he whiffs. But this stage is slanted and he's playing a heavy character, so I won't be able to get a full combo in before he hits the ground. So I'll go for a different combo that will force another 50-50, and if he guesses wrong, I'll be able to extend the combo and go for wall damage. And you're just sitting there trying to follow along like,
what?
Needless to say, it can be a lot. And it can be an extremely stressful experience to be at a constant state of tension with another person like that. Though, honestly, that kind of stress really only scales based off of how seriously you're taking the game. Because if you're just having fun at a party, chances are that you're not going to be too worried about making high-level 3D chess moves like your friends' lives depend on it. But that tournament level stress, that ain't no joke. The very first time I ever played a match just in a local, I felt so overwhelmed and nervous that I basically forgot how to play the game. All the muscle memory didn't so much as fly out the window, but more plummeted straight down like a bird that was kicked out of a nest too soon. I wasn't thinking, I wasn't watching my opponent, I was just trying to do stuff. Like, I was literally unable to handle the situation. That intense stress and nervousness is one of the first hurdles that you really have to get over when you're trying to play a game competitively. Because if you don't, you'll have a really hard time winning a single match, or even showing up at the tournament at all. But it doesn't even have to go as far as being at a tournament to have you taking a game seriously enough to have it stress you out. As long as you're engaged enough, feeling enough pressure, or are subjected to dealing with another real-life person, it can be enough to have you freaking out. If you've ever played Search and Destroy in Modern Warfare 2 back in those OG Xbox days, and have been the last one on your team left alive, then you need to go find yourself a therapist, because you definitely have some repressed trauma that you need to work through.
Goodbye, everyone. I'll remember you all in therapy.
The stress of not only having to carry the team on your back while they watch every move you make, but also knowing that if you mess up, they're gonna call you a whole lot of unkind things when you get back in that lobby.
Hair whack! It's gear whack!
Was a character building experience all on its own. Whenever you're in competition with another person, you're always in a battle with the ability not to only make the right choice at the right time, but to actually have the skill to perform the action, and to do it before your opponent can. But that tension and struggle is exactly why esports are so much fun to both play and watch. Because when you're going against someone and you're both pressuring each other, making reads, countering, being countered, performing frame-perfect maneuvers while under the stress of the environment and the match, and then you come out on top? It's an unreal Zendaya euphoric sensation. Like, why do you think people have pop-offs right after a really tough win? It's all that stress and tension leaving the body all at once and being replaced with pure joy. And that's the thing about video games. They often ask if you have the ability to overcome a challenge in order to succeed, whether that be against other players or just whatever devilish obstacles came to the developers during a fever dream. So when a game asks you to rise to an occasion and you can't, the inability to accomplish something that might take hours or even days to overcome can be a huge source of stress, but can also be a great source of accomplishment. A game might put you up against an enormously difficult boss or a mind-boggling puzzle and just sit there watching you, looking at its watch like, oh, don't worry, I'll wait, while you get pounded into the ground for like the 20th time in a row. And I mean, the most obvious example in this day and age are the Souls-like games. The stress and frustration that you feel in these games from getting crushed by an orphan with a placenta over and over again is supposed to give you the inspiration and motivation to get better and learn how to defeat that enemy so that when you finally do, you feel amazing and proud, like it's something that you truly just did. And that's one of the many reasons why these games have become so popular. There's something so sublime about battling with and overcoming that stress. But there's obviously a fine line with these kinds of games. No one wants to be stuck forever, feeling like they're beating their head against a wall, because being stressed and frustrated for a long time when you're supposed to be enjoying yourself isn't fun. And while in a game like Frostpunk, where things are constantly happening and you're still moving forward and experiencing different things, a difficult puzzle or boss makes you feel stagnant. not progressing, not experiencing more parts of the game, and just not having fun. And everyone has a different level of tolerance for that kind of stress. And not everyone is motivated by adversity. Some games do a great job of alleviating this issue through the game mechanics that shake up the feeling of not progressing. Hades is a perfect example. Even if you were to always die on the exact same floor every time, you would never have had the same experience twice. And that's because every floor is randomly generated and because every ability you get is too. Not to mention that you also get a lot of choices in both of those decisions. I never feel stagnant or at all frustrated. I can feel myself moving forward and experiencing something different on each run. And any stress that I do feel from possibly dying over and over again is immediately washed away whenever I step back into the Hall of Hades for a short rest and a chat with the homie Achilles, where a game like Dark Souls may feel to some like punching a wall and hoping to God that it cracks, just so you can inch a little bit forward. Hades is like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 1 step back. And that sense of progress keeps you sane. Plus, you can't really be too stressed while you're surrounded by the sexy versions of Greek gods. Delicious. For me, my reaction to these kinds of difficult games is pretty mixed. I love the Souls games, and Bloodborne's in my top 3 games of all time. And I do get an overwhelming sense of accomplishment when I finally beat a boss that I've been struggling against. And I do feel a sense of pride when I can easily beat something on the 2nd or even 3rd time around. But there are times where it can just be a little bit too much, and the stress is just annoying instead of motivating. The Soulsborne games and other Souls-likes are usually designed in a way to where if you mess up or fail, it's pretty obvious that it was on you. The game didn't cheat, the enemies aren't OP, I just need to learn and get better. And that's where the stress gives way to the motivation, and it keeps me coming back for the next run. Because I know I can do it, I just have to get good. But sometimes, there are just those 1 or 2 things per game that really just feel kinda unfair. And that's when the stress starts to feel bad for me, and then I kind of disconnect. It can sometimes feel like a battle between my head and my heart. Like, my brain is saying, the game is fair, calm down, I just need to figure out what to do and come up with a plan. And then my heart's like, okay, but we should find any and everyone who worked on this game and force them to eat soggy wet bread. So that leads me to times where I can spend run after run on something, enjoying myself and not being frustrated, to suddenly getting disgustingly disrespected by the Sword Saint and not even bothering to touch the game for a couple months. Like, hold on, for real though, this man pulled out an entire strap and said,
It was really good!
But much like with competitive games, that battle with stress and getting over that hurdle to not only perform well, but to succeed, is a feeling that can sometimes go beyond words. You can Edward Elric Fullmetal Alchemist transmutate stress into accomplishment, relief, and even pride. And then there's horror games. Horror games cause the same response of wanting to put the controller down and never touch it again, only with the added effect of nightmares. Nothing in video games stressed me out more than having to deal with some freaky spooky nonsense that might be around the corner. Cause you see, I didn't grow up playing horror games. I never touched Silent Hill or Resident Evil, and I realistically didn't even know they existed until I was older. So my experience with horror games is pretty limited. And when an otherwise chill game did show some elements of horror, whew, oh baby, you best believe them freaks from the Sculptural House were sipping lemonade up in my nightmares. The first time that I did play a horror game, which honestly wasn't that long ago, was an experience I'll never forget. Resident Welcome to the Family Son Evil 7th edition. And yes, before you ask, you can use the 6th edition. However, the page numbers might not line up with what's on the syllabus. But never had a game made me feel so stressed that I just didn't feel like doing anything. And I mean anything. I literally stood in one spot and didn't move. The atmosphere was just so oppressive to me that it felt like everything around me was a potential threat. That picture frame, it's looking a little sus, you know? That shadow hanging out around the corner, it's half a shade darker than the rest. You can't fool me, I know. I know you're waiting around that corner to slap me up, you moldy piece of trash. And then the longer it takes for something to happen, then the more stress just builds up. Because you start to feel like you're almost overdue for a scare. And that's when you're just feeling like you're on borrowed time. Like that game just got in my head in the best and worst ways possible. Had me talking to myself, heart beating all fast, just to convince myself to open a door. And it all came to a head when I was trying to avoid Marguerite. I had no ammo, bugs kept getting in my face, I'd used all my herbs, and I had no idea where I was going. And like, have you ever been in the middle of something like a movie or even just sitting and suddenly you realize all the things you're doing unconsciously? Because I did. And in that moment, my eyes were wide, my body was tense, I was barely even breathing, and going on a journey in my mind trying to figure out what the heck I was supposed to do. So I paused the game, told myself that I was gonna take a break, and that break lasted a year. But don't worry, I did build up my courage and experience by playing the re-release of the 2nd edition, and I eventually came back and finished number 7, and I'm honestly pretty good with horror games now. At least I think. Because horror games use the environment, the atmosphere, your knowledge, or lack of knowledge, to build tension. You're already uncomfortable because you're in some dark, quiet, and soulless place. Then add on that you know something is after you, but not when, where, or how it'll try and steal your soul. That's a recipe for some traumatic soup. But in some cases, it can taste pretty good. Not only all that, but then most horror games also want to make you feel vulnerable, weak, and in a constant state of peril. So they limit the amount of stuff you can carry and the resources you can find, and they make enemies way stronger than you. Or they might make it to where you literally have no way to fight whatever monster is trying to mash. Those feelings of weakness, uncertainty, and fear all add up to a wonderful stress cocktail that's just so engaging and immersive. The stress caused by fear breeds courage and pushes me forward to combat all that goes bump in the night, and I grew to love it. And stealth games basically work in the same way for me, partially because a lot of horror games have elements of stealth in them. When full-fledged stealth games utilize and put unique spins on the idea of, hey, don't get caught, the tension is there from the jump. Stealth games are another genre I went a long time without playing, so the first real one I played was the reboot series of Hitman, specifically Hitman 2, and it was an experience to say the least. It was so hard on me from the very start that I had to pause and take a walk around my house just to prepare myself. Cause the first mission of that game drops a huge stress bomb on you. The game starts with you approaching a house that you have to infiltrate and eventually assassinate a target in, and preferably not be seen. However, when you actually get up to the house, it's empty. There's no one there, and aside from a few security cameras, you're pretty free to roam around and do whatever you like. That is, until suddenly, your target and a whole fleet of her goons show up and post up all over the house. So now you're trapped upstairs, surrounded above, below, outside, and on the same floor as you. And you gotta figure out how to get your target, who always has said goons posted up around her at all times. And remember, hey, don't get caught. Since this was my introduction to real stealth games, unlike the ones I talked about earlier, it was a very stressful first start. Thus, pacing around my house at midnight. Because the game threw my expectations out the window and then suddenly brought them back with a
Surprise, motherfucker!
NANI?
after I'd gotten comfortable walking around the house freely and was no longer prepared to kill somebody, it low-key sent me into a panic. I was all ready for murder when I was walking up to the house, but now I'm just unprepared and struggling. The way it felt like the game laughed in my face while saying, "Gotcha, bitch!" was just glorious. Terrifying, but glorious. Playing Hitman, I felt the exact same way I did playing Resident Evil 7. Weak, unsure, afraid, stressed, and super immersed. The reasoning behind it might have been a little bit different, but the result was the same. Some of the most fun and memorable gaming experiences that I've ever had. And I think overall, that's where the best kinds of addictive and enjoyable forms of stress really come from. Immersion. It takes a lot for a game to really make me feel like I, as the player, am really going through what's happening on screen. But when I have to survive the harsh wilderness or make choices that matter, fight against someone or something who's trying to prove themselves, or sneak my way through Halloween Town, I have no choice but to feel like I'm right in the thick of it. This is me having to perfectly dodge every attack from the dancer. This is me having to make these assassinations. It's like part of the game starts to fade and blend just a little bit into your reality. And when a game becomes real, it can be stressful. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Hey, thanks for watching. If you made it this far into the video, I really appreciate it. If you like the song that's playing in the background, it's a song that I made and will probably be up on the channel as well, so feel free to listen to that. I'm also very curious if anyone else has had this kind of feeling. What kind of games stress you out in good ways, in bad ways? So if you do have something like that, then I'd love to hear it down in the comments. Yeah, I don't know. I was just kind of inspired to make this video because as of late, I've just played a bunch of games kind of back to back that have given me this weird, stressful feeling where I'm freaking out, but I'm really enjoying what's happening. So it kind of just made this video come together in that way. So yeah, if you got to the end, I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you feel like it, and hope to catch you on the next one.